Welcome back to the 45th episode of the Huggy Poker Vlog. Today marks the last day of our week-long trip out to Vegas, and what better way to spend that than taking one last shot at some 5-10 while we're here. I've really been enjoying the poker room in action at the Bellagio, and so we find ourselves here again for our 4th consecutive day. The very first hand, we're dealt Ace-King offsuit in the small blind. Action folds around to the cutoff, who makes it $30. We've got a premium that I would normally 3-bet here, but with it being our very first hand at the table, I do not want to get into a bloated pot out of position and have to face a tough spot with absolutely no reads. For that reason, I just go with a call. The big blind folds and we're heads up to the flop. It comes down 4-Jack-8 rainbow, so we don't make a pair, unfortunately. I check and flow to our opponent, who checks back. We get a free turn in the form of the 5 of hearts. I check again since we're not getting better hands to fold here, and our opponent makes it $50 now. This turn card is pretty unlikely to have helped our opponent, and given his check back on the flop, it's entirely possible our hand is best. I put in the chips to call, and the river brings an offsuit 4 pairing the board, which shouldn't change anything. I check, and our opponent thankfully checks back. I announce our hand, and we take down our very first pot. 3 hands later, we've got Queen 10 suited in the hijack. Everyone folds to us, and I raise to 30. Just the cutoff on our left calls, so we're heads up to the flop. And poker's off to a pretty good start today when the flop comes down 10-3-10 with 2 spades, giving us trips. In the past, I used to check a lot of flops like these in hopes of playing trappy, which I think works better at smaller stakes games. However, I found that making a standard c-bet on these boards in some of the bigger games is actually better since it not only continues to build the pot, but it's unlikely that our opponent is going to believe that we hit the board. With that, I quickly lead for $50. It doesn't take long for our opponent to make the call, and we're off to the turn. We see the 8 of hearts. Our hand should still be best here, though this card does bring in some backdoor draws, and perhaps even pairs up with some backdoor draw type hands that decided to float on the flop. Now that we've built the pot a little, I think this is the right time to let our opponent take the lead in hopes of either check raising here or hoping to make a big check raise on the river. I check, and he makes it $130. After thinking on it for a good 20 seconds or so, I decide to just call to see if we can get one more bluff out of him on a clean river. The river is almost a total brick in that it's a deuce, but it's the deuce of spades, bringing in the front door flush. It's a little tougher here to go for a check raise with the flush coming in. I think we could either lead here so as to not miss out on any value, or we could check and hope to get another bet, just calling since we're unlikely to get called on a check raise by any worse hands at this point. I go with the second route, letting our opponent continue to take the lead. He doesn't take too long before putting out a bet of $250, and I snap call. He shakes his head as if to say he's got nothing, and I show him our 10. It's good, and we take it down. The next orbit, we've got Jack-6 suited in the +2 position. I do that thing that I like to try to do every now and again at a new table and test the waters with a limp. I know some of you hate this, but I feel like it's useful to know how the table will react to a limp further down the road if there were an opportunity to do the same with a big hand instead of rags like we've got here. It folds to the big blind who checks, and we're heads up to the flop. It comes down 7-6 deuce with 2 diamonds, giving us second pair along with a flush draw. The big blind checks, and I make it $30. Our opponent peeks at his cards and throws in the chips to call. The turn's a pretty great one. It's the Jack of hearts, improving our hand to 2 pair now. He checks again, and I make it $100. In retrospect, with us pretty much having a lock on the hand at this point, I think we could bet half as much here to get value. As it stands, our bet's a little too large, and the big blind folds. 2 hands later, we've got King 3 suited under the gun. I raise to $30 first act with our suited king, and the hijack 3-bets to 90. It folds back to us, and I decide to make a loose call here. We're heads up to the flop when it comes down 3-Jack-4 rainbow, giving us bottom pair. I check and flow, and the hijack c-bets for $130. I think for a bit, and I'm a little deterred by the size of his raise, which has me thinking that he probably likes his hand. However, we've made a pair, which is hard to do, and I decide to go ahead and put in the chips to call. The turn brings an offsuit 10, completing the rainbow. I check again, and he pretty quickly puts out a bet of $240. It's pretty clear our opponent likes his hand, and even if he's bluffing, it's pretty obvious that we're going to have to pay big on the river to get the showdown. I go ahead and throw our hand away in hopes of finding a better spot. The very next hand, the first player on our left limps in, and the cutoff raises to 50. We look down at 2 Broadway cards with King-Jack offsuit in the big blind. Now, this is a hand that I've gotten involved with in this spot a lot in the past, but in trying to improve my game, I'm becoming more open to the idea of throwing away hands like these pre-flop when we're not the one opening, and especially when we're out of position. With that, I give this one up. 3 hands later, we've got what I definitely consider the most interesting hand of my entire trip out to Vegas. And before we jump into it, I first want to share the results of the poll I published relating to this hand. If you didn't see this poll, I simply shared the action without any of my subjective thoughts or insights mixed in, asking if viewers expected us to win, lose, or chop the pot at the end. As you can see, the results overwhelmingly expected us to lose the hand. With that, let's take a look at what actually happened. We're dealt ace-5 suited in the cutoff. The first player to act raises to 40, and the next player immediately 3-bets to 120. It falls to us, and I decide to get aggressive here, cold 4-betting with a hand I'd never really considered making such a move with in the past. I hadn't gotten out of line up to this point in the session, and I feel like it would exude strength to make such a raise. I make it $300. Action folds back to the 3-better who calls, and we're heads up to the flop. It comes down 4 ace-queen rainbow. So we flop top pair, but we obviously don't have a great kicker. I'm expecting our opponent to check and flow, but he ends up making an interesting lead for $210. I think with our aggressive preflop action, we can represent strength here, and so I continue with that line by pushing all in for $1,180 total. Our opponent goes into the tank, and the whole time I'm just trying to stare at one spot on the board, not giving anything away. The longer he thinks, I'm trying to process what he might have here. He can't have aces or queens, and I truly doubt he's got ace-queen, since I think all those hands definitely snap us off here on the flop. As the minutes pass, I'm a little worried about ace-king mostly, though I think that hand probably ships the money pretty quickly, or even comes back over the top pre-flop. Considering that, I'm thinking maybe there's a chance he's got a hand like ace-jack, meaning we do want to fold here. It feels like forever before finally, after 2 full minutes, he eventually calls. We're not happy about it, but let's go to the run out.
Ace. Ace and 4s. Wow. Okay. I did not think I was good. I thought I was hoping for the chop on the river.
Our opponent mucks his hand, and somehow we're good. I cannot believe it. What do you think he called with here? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. I won't spoil it with my insight just yet, but I do have an idea on exactly what I think happened here, and I even wrote a blog article about it recently. Click the link in the corner or down below for my perspective. In any case, we get a full double up, and we're sitting with 3 times our buy-in just 30 minutes into the session. We make a few raises over the next few orbits, taking some flops in some spots without really catching much of anything, and getting 3-bet in one other spot where we've just got to give up. Finally, 25 minutes later, we wake up with a premium. We're dealt pocket kings first to act. I make it $30, the player behind us calls, and both blinds make the call as well. The 4 of us head to a pretty ugly flop as it comes down 3-4 deuce rainbow. The blinds check to us, and we could definitely be betting here, but this is obviously a board that does not favor us, and I don't really want to be playing a bloated pot on a board like this with any overpair, even one as strong as kings. I decided to check back with the intention of going for a delayed c-bet, and the player behind us checks as well. We get a free turn in the form of the 8 of spades. The blinds check to us again, and given that this turn shouldn't change anything, I'm happy to go ahead and c-bet now. I make it $70. The player on the left calls, the small blind calls, and the big blind folds, so we're down to 3 for the river. We see the 9 of hearts, so all the obvious draws miss. We're realistically only losing to 9-8 at this point unless someone slow played a set all the way to the river. The small blind checks again, and I think we can go for value here with the idea that if we get raised, we might be able to find a fold and get away from it. I make it $200, and the player on the left folds. After a few seconds of thinking, the small blind folds too, and we take it down. 3 hands later, we've got another pretty interesting hand. We've got pocket 9s on the button. The player on our right limps in, and I raise to 50 with our pair in position. The small blind folds, and the big blind takes a look at his hand before 3-betting pretty large out of position to $210. The limper gets out of the way, and it's back on us. At first, it looks like the big blind committed most of his stack with just a few black chips behind, but then I realized there's another colored chip hiding on the bottom of his stack. I ask how much he's got, and the dealer speaks up to help clarify.
I'll just see your stick.
I got a big chip, 1,500.
Oh, what's the one on the blacks? Is that?
Yeah, 4 black and a yellow.
Okay, thanks.
So pretty sneaky, though I don't know if it was intentional. After I asked though, the player didn't fix it to put the chip back on top, and I'm surprised that the dealer didn't make him do that. If I hadn't seen the 1K yellow chip under there, I would have folded since it would have seemed like our opponent was committing himself to the pot. Now that I know we're much deeper stacked than it first appeared, I think we can make the call here. And the flop smacks us in the face as it comes down ace 5-9. We flop middle set. Our opponent leaves out for $130. I think calling and raising are both good options here. Raising charges any flush draw, which is good, but it also folds out any weaker premium pairs like kings or queens that might have 3-bet pre-flop. We're really only getting value from ace-king or ace-queen by raising here. I decided to go with a call with the idea that we can raise on any clean turn. The turn brings the 7 of clubs, so the obvious flush draw comes in and now our opponent checks. I don't think we can check back though. We want to get some value before any more scare cards come in. I bet a bit on the smaller side, making it 270. After about 15 seconds, he puts in the chips to call, and we're headed to the river where we see an ugly king of clubs. There's now 4 to a flush on board, and we're not holding a club in our hand. Our opponent thinks for half a minute before announcing a bet of $300. I'm hating this spot, but it's a pretty small bet, and we've only got to have the best of it here 1 in 5 times for a call to be worth it. There are still some hands we beat, so I go ahead and put in the chips to call.
Alright, I gotta pay. What you got?
He sheepishly flips up 7-6 suited in spades, and our hand is good. I guess he was going for a cheap bluff on the river, but our hand was just too good to get away from, unfortunately for him. We scoop a big one, and our stack just keeps growing. We've now got over $4,000 in front of us, meaning we've quadrupled up in just 1 hour of playtime. And it turns out the 3-bet from the big blind works out in our favor in more ways than one, as the limper admits he folded the ace of clubs.
And the ace of clubs. Do that shit.
And you had limped in, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad you folded.
The very next hand, we've got king 7 suited in the cutoff. The +2 player raises to 30, the player on our right calls, and we've got a suited king position, so I decided to join along as well. The button calls behind, and the big blind joins too, so we've got 5 to the flop. This feels like a Texas game. The flop is 10-9-4 rainbow, not helping our hand at all. Action checks all the way around, and the turn pairs the board with the 9 of spades. So we pick up a backdoor flush draw, and when action checks around to the player on our right, he leads for 1/3 pot, making it $50. We could just call and hope to hit our draw, but I think being aggressive here is going to get folds unless someone's got a 9 in their hand. I go ahead and 3x his bet, making it $150. Everyone folds back to the original bettor, who thinks for a few seconds before we hear the magic words. He mucks, and we pick up another one with just king high. We take a couple flops over the next 25 minutes, but we keep having to fold on missed flops when facing resistance. Eventually, we pick up ace-king offsuit under the gun. I raised to $30 first to act. The button and big blind both call, and the 3 of us head to the flop. It comes down 10-6 king with 2 hearts, giving us top pair, top kicker. Both players check, and I c-bet for $60 to charge any draws or worse hands. The button folds, and the big blind on the right calls without hesitation. The turn gets even better as it brings the king of spades, upgrading our hand to trips. He checks to us again, and I'm trying to decide how much to bet here. I think it could be on a draw, which we do want to charge with the right price to try to hit his draw if that's the case. But if he happens to have the case king, I'm inclined to bet more since he won't be able to fold here. I settle on $200. He double checks his hand, and he's obviously got a decision to make here. After a bit of thinking, we hear... He flashes ace-jack suited for the gut shot and throws his hand away. I show him what we've got to make him feel better about his laydown, and we take the pot. The very next hand, we've got the last interesting hand of the night. Everyone folds to the cutoff, who opens for 30, and the small blind calls. We look down at ace-king for the second hand in a row, this time in the big blind. We're out of position, and with the caller in between, I 3-bet pretty big to 160. After a few seconds of thinking, the cutoff calls, and the small blind ends up joining along too. It's not really what we were hoping for, given that we haven't made a hand yet, but hopefully we can improve on the flop. It comes down 6-4-10 rainbow, so no help to our hand, unfortunately. The small blind checks, and after giving it some thought, I just don't think this is a good spot for us to c-bet. I relent and check to the cutoff instead. He doesn't take long to put out a bet of $150. The small blind quickly folds, and it's back on us. We've got the nut-no pair hand, but it's going to be a hard one to continue out of position. Folding here is a bit exploitable, but we're about to wrap up our session after this orbit, and I'm okay with making the decision to fold here since I'm pretty happy with our session at this point, and I'm just looking forward to booking this big win. I fold, showing our hand, hoping our opponent will show his, but unfortunately, he mucks face down. Oh man. Bought into the 510 for 1K, cashed out for just shy of 4K, 39.88. We ran pretty damn hot, and we were lucky to get paid off by worse hands in the most important spots. That ace-5 hand where I cold 4-bet, and the guy called, and we got it in on the flop, the ace-5 flop. I swear that once we got the money in, I was like, he's got to have ace-jack. Like, ace-queen would snap off, ace-king would probably snap off there. But, like, ace-jack is the only hand that I think tank calls, but then he doesn't show on the river. It's got to be kings, right? Like, maybe he just thought I had jacks and was going crazy with it or something. So, I don't know, but we got paid off there. Got a full double there. We fought the set with 9s, and we were good on the 4 flush board on the river. Against a pure bluff where he could have bet more and maybe got me off my hand. I was worried about aces and kings given his pre-flop 3-bet against us out of position, but he didn't bet enough to get me off the hand, so paid it off, and it was the best. Had a couple of other just spots that worked out nicely in our favor and came out well ahead, so really happy with the results. 510 at Bellagio, and I should say 510 in Vegas for us has just been going fantastic. We've won money in every session of 510 we've played since we got here. So that is, I don't know, just I'm really impressed by that. Not saying I'm impressed by myself, like I've made some dumb mistakes, but you know, I'm happy with the results. I'm happy with the fact that I feel like I can play the bigger game here. I know people say 1-3 in Texas plays like the 510 here in Vegas, and that seems to be true, and I feel like I'm able to hang, so happy about that. Either way, thanks for watching. Hit the like, subscribe. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.